I'm Andrea Wallace, 28 years old now, and I'll never forget the moment I turned 18. That's when my mother's hand connected with my face, leaving a stinging mark after I dared to choose MIT instead of dedicating my existence to the family farm. The incident unfolded in the administrative office situated above where we processed almonds. The acceptance letter was still clutched between my fingers when she violently snatched it from my grasp and crushed the paper in her clenched fist. "You think you're walking out of here to play with computers?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "You're not going anywhere. This farm is your life." "The scholarship covered everything," I explained. "I can build something that doesn't live and die on crop prices. I don't want to spend my life arguing over irrigation schedules." Her palm struck my cheek with such velocity that I couldn't track the movement. All I registered was the sharp sting and the sound of impact echoing through the room. Heat flooded my face, my ears filled with ringing noise, and for several seconds the entire space seemed to fall into complete silence. Quote, 3. She declared in a voice both quiet and freezing. Quote, 4. Standing behind her, my stepfather observed the confrontation without uttering a single syllable. My brother positioned himself in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, his gaze directed firmly at the floor beneath him. I gathered my backpack, used the back of my hand to clear my face, and exited the office into the sweltering heat of the outdoor workspace. A decade would pass before I descended from my personally owned aircraft just beyond those same trees, causing every single one of them to stare as though they were witnessing an apparition. Before we dive into the details of how I transformed from being expelled from that office to piloting my own plane outside the very same facility, tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss more real family drama and revenge stories. Several hours after the confrontation, the full weight of what transpired began to press down on me like dust particles that refused to be swept away. I maintained forward motion because halting would mean acknowledging that I possessed nowhere to seek shelter. The highway extended before me without clear direction, and the singular certainty occupying my thoughts was that remaining close to the farm wasn't an option. Every recognizable person would bombard me with inquiries I lacked answers for. Consequently, the most secure decision involved creating physical distance. I moved toward the nearest town, carrying only a partially filled backpack and a weakening sense of confidence. That first evening arrived without any organized strategy. I positioned myself outside a supermarket until darkness enveloped the sky, creating the illusion that I was expecting someone's arrival. When the temperature dropped and cold air began infiltrating my clothing, I repeatedly scrolled through my phone until I eventually composed a message to the sole individual who might comprehend my situation. Her family had consistently demonstrated stability in ways mine never managed, and I harbored hope they maintained those same feelings toward me. When their front door opened a brief time afterward, the overwhelming relief nearly extracted all oxygen from my lungs. They refrained from demanding explanations. They avoided pressing me to articulate my circumstances. They merely created accommodation. And during that particular moment, it proved sufficient. Occupying their guest room wasn't designed to be permanent. I recognized this fact. I required a method to construct an existence that wouldn't disintegrate the instant someone shut a door in my direction. The following morning, I navigated through town investigating any establishment willing to employ someone lacking both experience and professional references. The roadside diner accepted me for late-shift dish-clearing responsibilities. Several blocks distant, a modest cleaning enterprise added my name to their overnight rotation. The labor itself wasn't intricate, but the schedule merged together until individual days resembled one extended stretch of commotion and depletion. I dedicated evenings to sanitizing countertops until my hands developed soreness, then hauled substantial trash containers across deserted parking areas beneath intermittent streetlights. I absorbed the cadence of persisting without anyone to depend upon for support. The MIT correspondence remained folded within my backpack, like something delicate I feared damaging through contact. I hadn't reached the point of accepting that my opportunity had dissolved because of a singular choice executed by another person. During every pause in my schedule, I re-examined the stipulations, hoping the conclusion would somehow transform. It remained unchanged. Without the tax documentation that exclusively my mother possessed, the scholarship funds couldn't be distributed. I contacted administrative offices, transmitted electronic messages to various departments, and attempted to locate alternative pathways, but every route circled back to the identical obstacle. There existed no method to debate with a framework that demanded documents I no longer maintained access to. When the truth eventually penetrated my awareness, the disappointment spread more profoundly than I anticipated. The aspiration I had pursued for multiple years had been halted by an obstruction beyond my influence. Surrendering, however, wasn't something I could consider. I investigated options within reach and discovered the community college in Fresno presenting programs that didn't necessitate identical paperwork. It diverged from the trajectory I desired, but it represented forward movement. And that reality proved adequate to prevent me from deteriorating into bitterness. I utilized the majority of my accumulated savings to provide the initial month's payment for a compact studio located near the town's perimeter. The space emitted a subtle scent of moisture-damaged wood, and the heating unit produced rattling sounds each time it activated. But ownership belonged to me. The nighttime hours contained quietness that compelled me to confront every thought I had previously suppressed. I remained awake, absorbing the sounds of vehicles traveling the external roadway, contemplating how much time would elapse before I ceased experiencing the sensation of being one misstep away from complete collapse. Academic sessions commenced shortly after I established residency. The educational facility wasn't expansive, but it supplied structure my existence desperately required. Maintaining a timetable, occupying a desk, and completing assignments delivered a perception of purpose. Between intervals at the diner and cleaning responsibilities, I transported my laptop constantly, engaging with modest coding exercises whenever I identified a brief opportunity. The established patterns didn't eliminate the uncertainty, but they assisted me in tolerating it. Even during periods when everything felt burdensome, I reminded myself that advancing forward, regardless of velocity, exceeded remaining stationary. I lacked knowledge regarding what the future would ultimately become. All I possessed was a modest room, an accumulation of educational materials, and the subtle determination that my journey wasn't concluded. And temporarily, that reality proved adequate to sustain momentum. As weeks progressed, the patterns I constructed began molding the iteration of myself I hadn't recognized I was developing. The weariness never diminished, but something unexpectedly stabilizing existed about maintaining every hour allocated. Morning lectures, afternoon examination, evening employment, and nocturnal cleaning responsibilities. None of it possessed glamorous qualities, yet each component secured my existence together in methods I desperately necessitated. The community college library transformed into my preferred location to decompress. It maintained sufficient quietness that concentration became achievable without the commotion from the diner or reverberations through vacant corridors. I distributed my educational materials across the surface, resolute in absorbing everything accessible. Even when my eyelids experienced heaviness, I compelled myself to persist. The challenges no longer generated fear in me. Regression did. One afternoon, while progressing through an assignment, I observed a woman at an adjacent surface rhythmically tapping her writing instrument against a notebook. Her concentration appeared intense, and the self-assurance in her demeanor caused her to distinguish herself. It wasn't admiration compelling me to glance repeatedly. It represented the unexpected confirmation that someone within this structure appeared to approach identical subjects with my level of seriousness. When she closed her computing device and departed, the vigor she projected persisted in the area she vacated, and I discovered myself desiring to maintain that benchmark. The educational facility gradually absorbed me through minor exchanges. A professor who deposited supplementary annotations on the display board. A fellow student who extended a study resource without anticipating reciprocation. Even informal acknowledgments caused me to comprehend I wasn't invisible within this environment. It felt peculiar learning how to exist in a world where nobody anticipated me sacrificing my aspirations to preserve a family reputation. Persisting for myself rather than another individual represented unexplored territory. Beyond educational boundaries, the requirements of extended employment hours never ceased. My hands acquired minor lacerations from scouring metal surfaces, and the muscles throughout my back constricted from elevating containers. Each shift reminded me how delicate security could prove. Yet, it simultaneously instructed me in resilience I had never encountered on the agricultural property. Nobody criticized the method I organized dishes or sanitized surfaces. Nobody monitored my actions with expectations that I would assume a responsibility I hadn't selected. The straightforwardness of being assessed exclusively by exertion, not ancestry, generated liberation. Despite advancement, certain evenings introduced doubt. I occasionally contemplated whether I had misjudged my personal capabilities, whether the individual who believed she merited admission to MIT had miscalculated her position. The contemplation typically surfaced when I occupied my studio alone, the humming of the heating mechanism filling the quietness. But even during those evenings when everything I labored toward appeared kilometers beyond grasp, I activated my laptop and compelled myself to continue absorbing knowledge. I couldn't accommodate the indulgence of halting. During one of those late sessions, I identified a campus organization concentrated on technology and engineering initiatives. Their digital presence listed competitions, collective activities, and gatherings I recognized I couldn't participate in because of my employment timetable. It generated pain, comprehending how much I needed to relinquish merely to maintain stability. But rather than permitting the disappointment to establish itself, I generated a modest folder on my desktop and populated it with initiative concepts I desired to attempt independently. If I couldn't participate with a collective, I would transform into my own team. Several weeks afterward, I accumulated sufficient funds to replace my deteriorating laptop power cell. It wasn't substantial, but the enhancement felt equivalent to replacing a malfunctioning component of myself. I positioned myself in the library subsequently, navigating through digital tutorials and coding obstacles, attempting to construct something that generated capability within me again. Every resolved challenge felt equivalent to reclaiming territory I had forfeited the day I departed from the farm. The more I labored, the more apparent it became that I necessitated guidance to advance further. Community college supplied what it could, but I required someone with expertise who could direct me toward possibilities I didn't recognize existed. When a professor documented observations on my initiative submission one day, depositing a comprehensive annotation about how I had addressed the assignment, something transformed. The response wasn't merely academic, it represented acknowledgement. It constituted verification that the labor I executed alone during nocturnal hours mattered to another individual. Weeks evolved into months, and the configurations that once felt temporary began solidifying into an existence I could nearly trust. The discomfort from what occurred at the farm diminished, not because it ceased generating pain, but because every modest accomplishment constructed a separation layer between me and the iteration of myself who once believed her future depended on another person's validation. I didn't completely grasp it during that period, but everything I was gradually assembling, component by component, shift by shift, was conditioning me for something I never envisioned would become achievable. By the time another academic term arrived, the velocity of my existence had established itself into something precise and regimented. I had ceased anticipating circumstances to become less demanding. Rather, I absorbed how to function within the disorder. Early mornings transformed into automatic behavior, and the weariness that once dragged me downward evolved into a quiet presence I transported constantly. It wasn't agreeable, but it reminded me why I maintained forward momentum. One afternoon, while advancing toward the science section, I observed a bulletin structure filled with announcements for academic obstacles and innovation initiatives. Most students advanced past without dedicating attention, but I halted sufficiently long to examine each document. The competitions weren't exclusively about securing victory. They represented stepping mechanisms into the world I had dedicated years attempting to access. The submission dates were restrictive, the anticipations elevated, but I experienced a spark that penetrated the repetitiveness of my pattern. I wasn't certain if I possessed the time or capability to engage, yet something internal to me communicated that I necessitated attempting. Across the subsequent days, I reorganized everything surrounding the concept of participating in one of those obstacles. I diminished the duration of a cleaning responsibility, acquired more productive study practices, and compelled myself to labor more rapidly without permitting quality to deteriorate. The framework of the competition demanded a notion, a preliminary model, and a documented analysis of how it could assist reality. It represented ambition for someone managing 2 employment positions. But ambition constituted the singular element in my existence nobody could extract. I dedicated nights positioned over my surface in the studio, encircled by notebooks and partially completed concepts. The heating mechanism hummed in the environment while I documented through diagrams, eliminated them, reconstructed them, then initiated again. Advancement arrived gradually, but each modification pulled the initiative closer to something logical. The more I constructed, the more apparent it became that I wasn't pursuing the validation I'd once requested. I was demonstrating to myself that departing the farm hadn't depleted me of capability. Laboring independently maintained limitations. I comprehended that I necessitated someone who contemplated differently than I executed. Someone who could address challenges from perspectives I overlooked. The woman I had observed in the library weeks earlier surfaced in my thoughts more frequently than I anticipated. Her confidence, the method she dissected assignments, the accuracy she transported. Those observations persisted with me. I initiated examining her labor whenever circumstances permitted, not originating from jealousy, but because witnessing her compelling herself generated desire within me to correspond with her intensity. Eventually, observations weren't adequate. I necessitated guidance I couldn't acquire from digital tutorials or late-night experimentation. When a professor supplied documented response on one of my technical submissions, I reread his observations until I comprehended every detail. His annotations exposed blind areas I hadn't recognized I maintained, and the clarity they transported strengthened the initiative. Each enhancement filled me with a perception of acceleration I hadn't experienced since the day the MIT correspondence arrived. The more profoundly I advanced into the competition stipulations, the more I recognized how substantially my existence had transformed. I no longer contemplated survival in the identical method I executed when I initially departed home. During that period, the objective was merely to maintain movement. Currently, movement possessed purpose, trajectory, and significance. When weariness pressed on me, I reminded myself that submission dates didn't concern themselves with the existence I originated from. They exclusively concerned themselves with the labor I contributed. My accumulated funds were restrictive, but I succeeded in purchasing several materials to construct a fundamental representation for the initiative. I assembled what circumstances permitted with economical supplies, improvising wherever gaps surfaced. The representation wasn't refined, but it illustrated exertion I once believed I wasn't capable of without institutional assistance. Each evening, I reinforced the framework, examining how different elements interacted until the notion began adopting realistic formation. Despite advancement, moments existed when apprehension infiltrated. The concept of failing publicly, of positioning myself externally only to fall insufficient, generated discomfort I attempted to disregard. But apprehension was recognizable, a distant reverberation of the voice that once communicated to me I was without value. Rather than retreating from it, I labored through it. Failure appeared less intimidating than maintaining stagnation. By the time the submission period activated, my initiative wasn't flawless, but it transported every particle of determination I possessed. I uploaded the documents, attached the documentation, and selected submit with hands that trembled from more than weariness. I didn't recognize whether I'd advanced past the initial evaluation, but the action of attempting felt equivalent to victory independently. I didn't comprehend it during that period. But this step, this quiet decision executed in a modest, dimly illuminated studio, would eventually propel my existence into a trajectory I never believed achievable. The notification electronic message arrived on a quiet morning when I wasn't anticipating anything beyond another extended day of labor and lectures. I had activated my laptop with the customary heaviness in my shoulders, prepared to examine annotations I barely remembered documenting. Instead, the subject description on the display captured my attention with a jolt of disbelief. My submission had advanced into the subsequent stage of the competition. For a moment, I didn't shift. The world felt peculiarly silenced, as if everything surrounding me had suspended to acknowledge this transformation. I hadn't permitted myself to envision I would progress. I had participated with the aspiration of demonstrating to myself that I could attempt, but witnessing my name documented among the selected initiatives generated something far more profound than relief. It felt equivalent to validation I had been pursuing long before I recognized it. The subsequent phase demanded in-person demonstrations and comprehensive evaluations. I recognized I wasn't prepared, at least not the method the others would maintain readiness. Most participants maintained access to superior equipment, smoother preliminary models, and more refined experience. I possessed a partially constructed representation manufactured from discount materials and innumerable nights of experimentation. Still, the contemplation of withdrawing didn't traverse my mind. I had advanced excessively far to redirect currently. Conditioning for the demonstration consumed every available second of my days. I reorganized responsibilities again, diminishing duration wherever circumstances permitted without jeopardizing rent payment. The diner supervisor wasn't enthusiastic, but the late-night cleaning enterprise allowed me to select responsibilities with adaptable timing, which assisted me maintaining the equilibrium I necessitated. Managing obligations transformed into an elaborate coordination where every miscalculation threatened to disintegrate the delicate framework I'd constructed. With each enhancement to the preliminary model, I experienced the separation between who I previously existed as and who I was transforming into stretched more extensively. I no longer perceived myself as the girl who had been expelled from her residence for selecting a different future. I perceived someone who declined to permit her existence to be dictated by apprehension or rejection. The initiative had transformed into more than a competition participation. It represented a reminder that my identity didn't depend on the anticipations that once suffocated me. As the gathering approached, the educational facility vibrated with anticipation. Students communicated quietly about the competitors they already perceived as leading candidates, individuals with extensive backgrounds, supportive instructors, and refined presentations. I observed them from the peripheries of crowded study spaces and corridors, absorbing their confidence, their connections, their comfort. Some maintained teams, while others possessed faculty support. I possessed none of those elements. Yet, the absence surrounding me didn't feel equivalent to a disadvantage currently. It felt equivalent to an obstacle I was finally conditioned to confront. On the day of the demonstration, I arrived early to establish my surface, the chamber filled with vigor, illuminated lights, refined exhibitions, and evaluators examining their documentation. My initiative positioned beside me, imperfect, but unmistakably mine. As the minutes advanced, nervousness coiled in my chest, but beneath it flowed a current of determination. This wasn't about demonstrating anything to the individuals who had dismissed me. It was about demonstrating something to the iteration of myself who once questioned whether she could position herself here at all. When my opportunity arrived, the atmosphere appeared to intensify with quiet anticipation. I positioned the preliminary model, the method I had rehearsed innumerable times. The activities surrounding me obscured as I concentrated every particle of attention on presenting my labor clearly. I depended on the comprehension I had constructed through innumerable nights of exertion. Every imperfection I had corrected, every modification I had executed, every component of the notion I had restructured until it generated sense. The demonstration wasn't flawless. The representation flickered once, and I needed to stabilize my hands more than I desired to acknowledge. Yet for the initial time in years, I didn't interrogate my position in a chamber populated with individuals who believed they belonged there. I experienced myself positioning firmly, stabilized by the recognition that every step that transported me here had been carved through my personal persistence. After the presentation concluded, I organized my materials with a peculiar calmness. I didn't recognize how the evaluators would respond or whether I had executed adequately to advance forward again. But as I stepped into the corridor and experienced the cool atmosphere of the structure contact me, I recognized something had transformed permanently. I was no longer inhabiting an existence molded by survival exclusively. I was initiating to construct a future I could claim with certainty. What I didn't recognize during that period was that this competition, this singular gathering on an otherwise ordinary educational facility, would ignite the sequence of possibilities that would eventually transport me far beyond anything I could envision in that moment. The days subsequent to the competition felt peculiarly suspended, as if time had extended itself thinly, anticipating something to manifest. I maintained movement because halting meant permitting anxiety to establish roots, and I didn't possess the indulgence of forfeiting acceleration. My responsibilities continued, my assignments accumulated, and the patterns I had carved into my existence remained steady. Still, there existed a quiet vibration beneath everything, an unspoken consciousness that a door might be activating somewhere beyond sight. That transformation arrived unexpectedly, infiltrating my existence in the formation of an electronic message from one of the gathering coordinators. I had been positioned in the library attempting to advance on reading I had disregarded while conditioning for the competition when the notification surfaced on my display. I hesitated before activating it, apprehensive of what the communication might contain. My heart accelerated as I selected, preparing for rejection disguised as encouragement. But the communication wasn't a dismissal. It represented an invitation. My initiative had captured the attention of a faculty participant who recommended me for an innovation initiative sponsored by an engineering corporation in Sacramento. It wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it supplied mentorship, resources, and the opportunity to develop my concept beyond the restrictions of my studio apartment and restrictive budget. The possibility felt unrealistic, as if I had stumbled into an iteration of my existence I wasn't certain I merited yet. Agreeing to participate in the initiative signified one element. I needed to reconstruct my existence again, this time surrounding a new objective. I reorganized timetables, eliminated unnecessary expenditures, and carved out time to navigate between the educational facility and the initiative's location. The commute was extended, and the nights were even more extended, but each step forward tightened my grasp on the future I had been attempting to access. The initial time I entered the corporation's workspace, I experienced a rush of nervousness. The environment vibrated with concentrated vigor, display boards filled with illustrations, activated computers streaming sequences of data, and individuals who transported themselves with the confidence of those certain of their purpose. Positioning among them felt surreal. I wasn't certain if I belonged, but I recognized I desired to earn my position here. The initiative paired me with a mentor who examined my notion with a precise analytical perception. His response arrived in the formation of annotated documents, diagrams, and suggestions layered with accuracy. Instead of experiencing overwhelmed, I absorbed everything. I dedicated nights examining his annotations, rotating them over repeatedly until they generated sense. For the initial time, I maintained access to guidance that compelled me beyond what I could accomplish independently. The more I labored, the more the initiative evolved. What initiated as a rough concept constructed from discounted materials transformed into a structured design with apparent capability. Each enhancement felt equivalent to peeling away another layer of questioning that had adhered to me since the day I departed from the farm. Gradually, I experienced myself discarding the burden of the past and stepping into an existence defined by deliberate selections, not compelled obligations. Some nights weariness pressed heavily against my ribs, but the strain no longer felt vacant. It transported purpose, an anchor reminding me of how far I had advanced. The more advancement I executed, the more I comprehended how substantially I had been molded by the struggles I once resented. They had carved resilience into my skeletal structure, sharpened my instincts, and transformed me into someone who didn't disintegrate under pressure. As the months advanced, my obligations expanded. The initiative introduced networking gatherings, initiative examinations, and workshops that exposed me to individuals constructing careers I once exclusively read about. Entering through those chambers felt equivalent to accessing a world that had consistently existed, but had never felt accessible. I examined how individuals presented themselves, how they articulated their concepts, how they transported confidence without arrogance. Every observation transformed into another instrument I secured away for subsequent use. The initiative wasn't exclusively constructing a project, it was constructing me. The transformative point arrived during a late-night session at the corporation. The location illumination was dim, and most surfaces positioned vacant. I persisted behind to finalize refining a section of the design when I recognized I didn't experience like an outsider currently. I wasn't positioning on borrowed territory. I wasn't pretending. I was contributing. I was expanding. I was absorbing how to position in spaces I once believed were beyond access. Reflecting backward, it was in those quiet hours, encircled by the humming of machines and the illumination of my laptop display, that I comprehended something important. I wasn't merely attempting to escape my past. I was constructing a future powerful, adequate to eclipse it. What I couldn't foresee was how rapidly that future would accelerate and how the subsequent possibility would propel me far beyond anything I had envisioned. The subsequent transformation in my existence arrived with a seriousness that generated everything before it feel equivalent to conditioning, for a moment I couldn't avoid. My labor at the initiative had expanded into something more substantial than I anticipated, and one afternoon I received a proposal that restructured the trajectory of my future. A startup enterprise in San Francisco contacted after examining one of the initiatives I had contributed to, supplying a position that transported both responsibility and the opportunity to expand my capabilities far beyond the restrictions of the initiative. The possibility felt nearly unrealistic, yet something internal to me recognized I had been advancing toward it for years without recognizing it. Accepting the position signified uprooting my patterns once again. I organized my possessions with a calmness that surprised me, folding away the reminders of extended nights dedicated constructing a new existence from nothing. The transition to San Francisco arrived with obstacles, but they were the variety I had absorbed how to navigate. New environments, new anticipations, and the unspoken pressure to demonstrate I belonged. The city transported a velocity that compelled me to maintain expansion, and each step forward generated more stabilization in the identity I had been molding since the day I departed home. What initiated as an entry-level position evolved rapidly. I dedicated late nights at my surface refining notions, absorbing from individuals who had carved out their position in the industry through years of relentless labor. I absorbed everything: their strategies, their problem-resolving instincts, their capability to adapt. Each experience added another layer of confidence I didn't recognize I was absent. I wasn't merely surviving possibilities currently, I was molding them. As the months evolved into years, the enterprise expanded and I discovered myself stepping into leadership positions. My concepts were accepted seriously. My initiatives earned acknowledgement, and the quiet determination I once transported in solitude transformed into a force I could witness reflected in the labor I produced. Eventually, an investment collective approached me with the possibility of launching an enterprise of my personal, something innovative, something demanding, something that aligned with everything I had been constructing. I communicated affirmatively. Constructing an enterprise demanded concentration I didn't recognize I still possessed. The extended hours returned. The uncertainty established itself again. But the distinction this time was that I wasn't constructing out of desperation. I was constructing with purpose. The enterprise expanded. Investors participated. Agreements formed. And across time, the success that once felt beyond access transformed into part of my reality. When the possibility arrived to purchase a compact aircraft for business navigation, I hesitated exclusively sufficiently long to acknowledge what it symbolized: mobility, independence, and the quiet affirmation that I had stepped completely into the existence I once believed was closed to me. That chapter of expansion transported me backward to the past in an unexpected method. One morning, an electronic message arrived from a financial consultant requesting a gathering about a struggling agricultural operation in the Central Valley. The designation of the farm pulled me into a stillness I hadn't experienced in years. It was the identical location I had departed behind, the identical business I had been communicated to. I was ungrateful for departing from. Their debt had climbed beyond anything sustainable. Their production quantities had deteriorated. The operation risked shutting down. I positioned with the information for an extended time before deciding what to execute. The burden of my history with that land pressed on me, but anger wasn't what surfaced. What elevated instead was clarity. I possessed no obligation to rescue the individuals who had compelled me out. But I comprehended the consequences their downfall would transport to the laborers who depended on the farm to persist. Preserving the location didn't signify preserving them. When I finally returned, my aircraft contacted down on a compact strip near the property. Positioning on the soil I once traversed as a teenager, I experienced no longing, no apprehension, nostalgia, exclusively distance. My mother and stepfather approached with expressions tangled between shock and desperation. The years had altered them. Lines etched more profoundly, tensions carved into their posture, but nothing in me shifted toward forgiveness. The negotiations were direct. I examined the records, investigated the debts, and purchased the land and facilities through a holding enterprise under my designation. The employees persisted. The farm continued, but my mother and stepfather forfeited ownership completely. Their selections possessed consequences that arrived without ceremony. Entering through the fields afterward, I comprehended the finality of the moment. I no longer necessitated closure from them. I didn't necessitate recognition or reconciliation. The success I constructed transported adequate burden to position independently. What mattered most was the truth I had absorbed across every step of my existence. Breaking away from the anticipations that attempted to define me was the initial step toward transforming into the individual I necessitated to become. Pain had molded me, but resilience had transported me. And positioning there, confronting a future unbound from the past, I recognized the lesson completely. Some doors close violently, but the existence you construct after entering through them can be stronger than anything departed behind.